I guess I'll start in the sense that there is something that I think when I was looking at the data, I went a little overboard in something that Cello had said when he and Makeda and I met late last week. And that was basically that in the workforce one, it seemed like there was a lot of overlap between the two groups, between the workforce and the organization. And so Cello had basically said, well, in the workforce one, it's really about the employees and what the employees do and how the employees see things. And the organization one is more about what the organization does. And so I think I went completely overboard. If people look at the Alice's tab in the workforce one and putting everything in terms of like employees, which then leaves a lot of input we got from people that was really more about things the organization does, sort of hanging out there. And there's a few places where I flagged where I said, like, move this to organization, ? And like I said, I think I went too far. But I guess my question is, like, where is that line? Should we be, so I'll say, for instance, there was a thing about equity and inclusion in the workforce one, which I believe because there was a fairness bucket.
Yeah.
And so in that one, almost all of the recommendations we got were in terms of like the organization has a diversity work unit. And the organization implements EDI principles and stuff like that. And so I was like, do I say, haha, we're going to move these over to organization? There you go, Mark. Or, are we a little more flexible? So I just wanted to have a conversation with you guys, just so that we all have a common understanding.
And
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, it's okay.
No, I was going to say, and it's also challenging because I think a lot of the initiatives sort of that organizations come up with to address these things are created through the discretionary effort of their employees. So when you motivate them and do your change management, employees going to go above and beyond, and then those things become institutionalized. But then, is that from the workforce side or the organization side, if employees are taking it upon themselves to sort of drive these changes?
Yeah, and if people, if an example helps. So for example, I had said, like, employees celebrate diversity in their workplace, and employees actively examine hidden biases in the process and policies they implement. But I didn't put anything in, like was suggested, that the organization actively seeks out to eliminate blind spots, or the organization has accurate data on their current state. So yeah, that was like, well, you kind of can't have one without the other, as Makeda was saying. And so, yeah, I didn't know if you guys on the organizational culture side wanted to have those things as part of yours, or if we should keep some of them in the workforce one.
Well, they are very strongly related. So if organization acts, the workforce reacts, and the other way around. I think that my thought was when we talked that if we were going to leverage this maturity model for change to help us with change management, then if there's a characteristic that can be impacted by the organization, really, what needs to change, that it would be in the organization. And if it has to do with sort of the workforce side, and I understand that there's so much interaction that it's not like a clear call. And I think, I wouldn't, totally open. I think that between the four of you, that whatever comes up as a consensus, we can discuss that. And I don't have my own agenda or plan that would, that I would like to, people to follow anything. Just my thought is, how can we make it so it's kind of practical, so people look at it and they can make it actionable. They can figure out how to actually do something about it and stuff like that. So that was my thought.
Alice, I'm wondering if you might be able to say, here are some basic characteristics that relate to workforce, and here's some basic characteristics that relate to organization, and actually include it in both, but based on those different lenses that you're looking through. If you wind up doing a survey or an assessment, there's overlaps, but maybe it belongs a little bit in both buckets. But in general, it seems like maybe it's organization rather than employee. But there are aspects to it. If I'm a diverse employee, I want to be included. I want to, have a voice, and there are impacts on workforce in terms of what processes get set up and what changes get made. So I don't know. It seems like that is an overlap area.
Yeah, and I just use that as an example, but I think there was in some of the other areas that weren't specifically focused on diversity, it was similar. I'm just trying to find like another one. Oh, like hold on.
So I'm sorry, I had to step away for a couple of minutes, but are we talking about some of the comments to say that they're more related to org culture rather than workforce, and whether we should move them?
Yeah, basically. So I'll use another example here for training and development. There's obviously like some of the statements I started to come up with were things like training and education are embraced by employees. But obviously there's also like the organization supports training and education. So do we keep them together in, say, workforce, or do we have one that says training and education are based by employees in workforce, and another one in organization that says the organization supports training and education for employees? That's like the question I'm asking.
The way I looked at it as I was developing some examples to look at today, I took the comments, tried to make a statement out of it, which I thought would be an example of the level 5 maturity. And some of it applies to both workforce and organizational practice because the both things are, they're the outcome, right? They're the not necessarily the output, but the outcomes of all these different things which make up either organizational culture or workforce experience. And the two, I don't think you can, there's no clean line between those things, because workforce experience is certainly part of organizational culture. And organizational culture will create a workforce experience, right? So what I would suggest we might do is just do our best, just if it looks like it's, write one down for employees and write one down for the org, and then we can decide later where it lands and make our emphasis on trying to get the good ideas into writing, and then we can, and why not? Why couldn't they exist in both, right? I mean, this isn't, I don't think this has to have really clean lines. I think those models were good for us to help us from a starting perspective, but I definitely wouldn't stifle your good ideas about just because you think it might fall over into more of an organizational practice, because certainly organizational practices create workforce experience. I mean, there's no question about that, right?
So my thought is this: based on what we have right now, if we work on them separately, whatever you have, Alice, what you and Makeda are working on, if you group them and you say, here's a statement that we think should align with this, and then we do the same with ours, then obviously at some point we're going to look at them side by side and say, hey, maybe this might need to move over here, or some of this we move over here. I think at that point it'll make it more clearer to kind of say what needs to be, and then we'd be open to moving them between the two. But I think now we just keep them as is and work on them with our ideas as is, and then combine them at a later date, or move them at a later date.
Yeah, and if I might even extend that idea a little bit, I mean, we could even have them exist in both and just highlight the fact that this is also something that we think is part of workforce experience.
Right.
So I don't think because I think the crosstalk between the two would be good, and just identify it as one that, well, this one also exists over here too, because that way we don't have to get into a lot of arguments. Well, shouldn't that be in workforce? Well, it is in workforce. We here it is. We identify that it should be here and it should be there, because it's clear it's a continuum. There's no bright line here. I mean, you could draw a line anywhere, and then we'd spend a bunch of time arguing about where the line should be.
Hey, Mark, there might be, I really liked your statements that you made. I mean,
Yeah.
I think getting to those statements is important, but it could be that if you said, if I'm looking at this particular characteristic or aspect, how would you do, what would a statement look like for organization, and what would a statement look like for employees?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
and then you could acknowledge, like you're saying, that there's overlap, you know?
Good point.
So I don't know if Alice and Makeda have had a chance to look at what we've done with the
I
org
don't think so.
cultures.
We
Unless
looked
they
at the
opened it up
draft
this
that you
morning.
guys, yeah, we looked at the draft you had Thursday morning, but I haven't personally looked at it since then, and I know you guys have worked on it, so. And I like what was just said about, because I was putting things in things that were kind of more easily measurable terms, and for me, the way my brain works, you either have to ask how do the employees feel about it, or the organization feel about it. So I was clearly making statements that were one or the other. But I can easily then go in and for almost every one of these statements that I put together, put an organizational side to it, and then we can discuss from there.
And I think too is as you're working through the ones that you do feel may have that overlap with org culture, that you can make that comment, and then we know that those are the ones that we need to kind of focus on after we've developed this to
Yeah,
kind of say,
Makeda.
hey, where do these fit? We can, if you want, I can share my screen and show you quickly what we've done.
Yeah, and Makeda included a comment in the chat line that says, in order to achieve this, the organization needs to fill in the blank, and employees need to fill in the blank. That's in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you
Go ahead.
want, I can quickly share the screen and show you what we've done, so that might give an idea of where down the line we can start working together on these.
Yeah.
And by the way, Mark, I really did like the statements you've made us put in there too.
Thank you.
So what we did was we basically went through each layer. So we combined all the input that we had received into some very high level categories. These categories it's like a theme, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's something we're going to use, but we just try to kind of say, okay, when I'm looking at the results and everything that came up, I started grouping them together, and I said, what's the theme of these comments? And so so, for example, under results, we had defined performance indicators, and all these inputs that talked about KPIs and targets. And I just kind of gave it a category. Again, those categories don't mean anything other than that those are the themes of those comments. And then the PI awareness, measurements, how do you measure PIs? Some shared vision, I combined those, opportunities and reward. So the way I saw this really was, I see an organization having a vision and then defining, how they would achieve that vision, and then how do they make sure that everybody in the organization understands what that is, and then measure it, and then give some opportunities and measure, and then there's a reward at the end of the day, right? So that was pretty cool the way it kind of all fit in. And then did the same thing for accountability. So basically combined anything that kind of looked like they were talking about the same thing and then gave it some kind of category. Did the same for control and values and trust. And so, so based on those, and then these can be moved around, combined, however we want to take the next step. But this was just a starting point. And then Mark came up with some really good sort of level 5 maturity examples to say, okay, if we were going to define performance indicators, then at a level 5, the organization has the KPIs, they are measured, goals are set, and results are openly discussed at leadership meetings. And so kind of he came up with these, again, examples. We haven't finished all those yet. Mark, I did have a thought though. You say C number 2, so you're saying that this one, stop, nose, or KPIs would fit here as well?
Well, in terms of related to, because the transparency and the collaboration and setting goals, so they're definitely related. But I just did that, like I say, this can all use some more work too. So I definitely thought that the 4 bullet points that were under that one related strongly to number 2. Although I think you could again create one that's more specific in terms of the transparency too, because that's
Yeah, Mark.
people know each other's goals.
I
So.
think, yeah, so because to me, the vision, so when we talk about organization culture, the culture of having something we're all aiming for, the PIs are how we're going to get there. So I do see them as 2 different things. Like, so
Oh yeah.
like, here's a vision. This is where we want to be. Our CEO at GLWA says we want water of unquestionable quality. Excellent. What does that mean, right?
Yep.
So how do we measure unquestionable quality? What are the PIs that are going to relate to that? And then do the employees realize that we need these PIs so that we can achieve this vision? So to have that culture, I think that.
Yeah, and I would, if you can please help write a statement to that, because if you look at that last bullet point, what I was really looking at wasn't so much the category as when I looked at the bullet points. And if you look at that last bullet point under the shared vision one, that cascading goals tied to strategic and operational goals, that's really where it relates back to number 2.
Oh, okay. I see what
Yeah,
you're
so I think it'd be wonderful. You're extending their ideas that we got in that brainstorming session, which I think is fantastic, because I don't consider what we got to be a closed book. It's an opening, and I think creating and I completely agree with you. Vision needs to be translated down to things so that you can make it. How do you make a vision happen, right? And those things are translatable, and they eventually become the organization's strategic outcomes. You use then your KPIs to measure your progress toward them. Groups have PIs. Individuals have their own goals. Yeah, absolutely, it all works together. So yes, we can absolutely write a statement that ties that vision to the performance indicators and the key ones. Yeah, good point.
This, as an example, I know that getting asset management going, and Scott can attest to this at GLWA. It's not only change, but it was kind of hard for people to accept. Like, what do you mean? I manage assets every day. I know what this pump does, and what are you going to come and tell us how to do our jobs? And yet that's not what asset management is about, right? We know how you know how to maintain. So it was the first meeting that we had of all our team leaders, and that, our annual meeting. And Scott, I'm not sure if you were there or not, when Sue McCormick stood up and spoke. We asked her, a CEO, to come and do an opening, 5-10 minute talk, and her, out of that, and we taped it, and there was a sentence, and there's a quote from her that I use on our intranet site, and I cite it everywhere and anywhere that I can whenever I'm presenting, is for her to say, asset management has to be something that we think about every single day. It is what we do every single day. That was her vision for asset management, is in that everything that we do, it has to be part of our culture about what we think every single day. So that kind of set the tone for the organization to say, then we start developing PIs and the strategic plan and all the AMPs and all of that became, kind of hinged on that kind of vision. That's where I think all the change management, the org culture, changing people's mind has to be aspirational. And there has to be that aspirational component before we start doing any of the measurement and boots on the ground kind of stuff. My thought.
Good points. Very good. Yeah, no, I agree. And that's part of creating the purpose too, right? Why do we do what we do? And most of our utilities, we try to be very purpose-driven organizations. So I have to step away for just a couple of minutes. I have to take something here for just a few minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay. One of the this is a minor detail maybe, but I really like the 360 feedback. But you know, it could be 360 and supervisor feedback is the norm, you know, just because I do like the boldness of your 360 feedback comment though, because I think a lot of organizations don't do it. They're afraid to do it. They don't know how to do it, you know, those kind of things. But actually listening to more voices, because people are, you know, need that feedback, positive and negative, actually.
I agree.
So Makeda, I think that how to measure the bar maybe came from you. Do you feel that this is in the right place? I just kind of testing, and that because sometimes for me, you know, the thoughts that people kind of entered into the chat line maybe a little cryptic. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting them correctly. You know, so does that make sense?
You're on mute.
Yes, I definitely am on mute. Still been having computer problems too, so I apologize for the camera not being on and all of that. But so I think, I mean, I like the idea of being sort of aspirational. We know that there's inherent values in this sort of work and this sort of approach, but does the lack of measures at the outset sort of impact our ability to have a business case and drive that sort of socialization with folks in our organizations and teams who may not already be on board with this way of thinking? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Cello, you may want to comment on this, but when we get to the assessment part, you know, we're basically in effect saying to what extent are we doing these things? So you can make it actionable if you basically do an assessment along with these aspirational goals and then identify what do we need to improve, and then you do the change management associated with it. And hopefully there would be metrics associated with at least the action plan, you know, that you're implementing. Does that resonate or not?
Yeah, to me that makes sense what you said. Yes.
And just, Cello, to your point, you know, this is one person, my viewpoint on grouping these, right? So they're not set in stone. So if anyone thinks something needs to be moved elsewhere, or there's a separate category that we must have, this was just like starting point, go through, throw things in where we think they belong, and then, but like to your point, Cello, if the idea was something different to where we have it, then we move it, right? So, or
I think that what you have done has been very useful. I think it is really good. I think it was also useful as an example as we look at the workforce. And I fully agree that when we fill it out the first time, we made sense out of hundreds of comments, and we consolidate. So what you've done is, I think, very quite remarkable. And there may be, so you've made the next step from here, which is trying to figure out, a lot easier, because you provided the structure, you organized the content and so forth. So then we could definitely have a conversation. I think we're going in the right direction, definitely. And I think that as we move down the line, this group can, fill out a few more statements, have discussions like this, progress, then we can put them side by side, we can consolidate. And I think we're I think we're on the right track for sure. And I think that if, for example, we do continue with what Mark is doing, it will also be helpful. And what Alice and Makeda are doing, I see how it's all going to jive, connect. And I think I hope that everybody can now get to the files they need, because the idea was that you could see what the other group is doing as well. So
It also strikes me, Khosrow, that some of the, like in accountability, I mean, you scrolled ahead, but under accountability where you left it blank, there were items that could be part of action plans as opposed to the statements of what your aspirations are. So, which could fit nicely. Because there was something in there about do an employee survey. There was something about, having, I was looking at it. Yeah. Develop metrics to measure performance. Some of these things, not everything, but some of them would be the kind of things that you would do on the change side on the improvement side. So I think it's really great documentation and good organization. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go. Yeah.
And we shouldn't consider that these comments that people typed into the chat line are like, they didn't bring in these things on stone tablets. It was kind of a...
Really?
I'm sorry?
No, I was just laughing. Down from the mountain.
Yeah. So they were in the chat line, and people were kind of free, improvising and saying whatever came to their mind. It doesn't mean that it's now a rigid structure that we have to adhere to and not step away from. It was just thoughts that people had, and if we need to consolidate them, make sense out of them, organize them, we just have to do that. But we can't treat these 400 comments as like, some, part of the canon now,
The other thing I did want to, Alice, based on your comment, so there was something, I was just at it. Sorry. There's something on training in here. Training and development. So here, training, sorry. So under trust, train how to handle conflict or disagreements, and training on what trust for an organization really means, and understanding what motivates one person does not motivate another. Some of this could be under workforce development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, absolutely. And I think that what you've done is great. What Mark has, everybody's doing really good stuff in terms of consolidating. And I think if we just give it a bit more time and a bit more effort, it will start to crystallize. And it's also, these 2 weeks are weeks of holidays. And I think that every time you approach this spreadsheet, you will have new ideas. You will remember, because, a pattern will start to emerge. And then, that will mature. But I think that how we're proceeding makes a lot of sense. I think that this is really good. And I would say if you guys would have the patience to stick with it a little bit more and just we keep building it up, I think that this is excellent stuff.
So for Alice and Makeda, does this spreadsheet make sense to you? Is that a good way to, do that documentation?
Makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to me. The one thing that I can see being a potential problem here, and this is I'm good at these philosophical discussions, I apologize. But this is sort of a philosophical discussion that Cello and Makeda and I had the other day, was that the level 5 maturity examples are great in terms of like a big overriding statement, but when you get down to trying to measure it, sometimes it includes several different elements that have to be measured separately. And so kind of what I'd been concentrating on is breaking down those individual elements that you could measure. And so didn't start to go the way of putting together the overall level 5 maturity example. And so maybe that's it. Like we need to kind of combine these two ways of thinking about it. And I don't know, maybe that's maybe Makeda, maybe you're much better at that than I am. Sort of consolidating it all into a great sort of example. And we could split it similarly to how Kaisra and Mark separated the work.
And I think our categories sort of map, so we can even just talk offline maybe after this conversation about how we want to map those and then work on the consolidation and get to the level 5.
And
but
then as you do that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but in those categories, if you find that we should rename them or please feel free, because obviously this is, like I said, this is one person throwing stuff together, you know, over the holidays. So, you know, if you feel and if we need to refine those categories a little bit more, make it more better, easier for us to work with, let's do that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But I think, you know, this has been really good progress, excellent work by everybody. And if we just stick with it a little bit more, and then, you know, what we've talked about, you know, add a bit more content, and please feel free to reshuffle and, you know, between Mark and Kaisra, talk about, you know, and do we move this here? Do we consolidate? Whatever it is. But Kaisra, what you provided and organized, I think is exactly the way to proceed. And Mark, the statements that you made are also very helpful. So in the Alice's analysis is also, and Makeda's, everybody, I'm like extremely happy with the way things are going. And I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and I think, and please, the level 5 maturity statement I put in there is just a statement that draws from some of those comments. There can be multiple statements that come out of it, like as Kaisra pointed out about the vision statement, where I really picked up the connection with the one about the individual goals. But there's other statements in there, and you could definitely form more maturity statements from those. So I didn't mean to, nor are they fully comprehensive statements. They're just a statement that drew from the information that Kaisra did a really nice job of organizing for me to look at. So my plan is to continue working on it and just look at those statements and draw from that and make a good statement for those categories. And some will definitely pick up from other places too. And then I think that can give our groups some good meat to work on, right? To either keep them, improve them, add to them. You know, some will set off to the side because we have lots in that category. These two capture it really well. So to me, this is sort of in the middle of the process where you're just using these things to help generate ideas, and then we'll see what comes out at the other end with some more work.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I was looking at what Makeda and Alice had done. It's really great. I like the way, Makeda, you broke it down in the categories as well. So this is good. Alice, did you have some of these questions that were up here? Were those for today's meeting?
Those were actually for our meeting on Thursday, the things that we talked about, and then I bolded kind of what our decision was.
Oh, okay.
So that was, yeah.
Okay, so what's the next step?
Okay, well, I think we're on the right track.
Yep.
So if you guys just keep do the voodoo that you do so well. That's from a song. Anyway, another obscure jazz reference. So I think that's great, and I think we can give everybody, you know, a half hour back. I just want to check with Makeda to see if she's cool and on board.
Yeah, I am on board, and I think, Alice, do you have time after this meeting for us to touch base?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll be continuing the conversation.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. This is really excellent stuff.
Great job.
Do we have a meeting scheduled, our next meeting for this team?
Yes, it's next Monday.
Oh, all right, I'm sorry. So we have a week to kind of work on
Well,
that.
let me check. Hang on just
Yeah.
a second. Let me check to make sure. Let me check to make sure.
Looks like 10:30 on Monday.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the 4th, right? Yeah, that's correct. That's 10:30, which would be 1:30
Oh, yeah.
for you, Keisha.
For some of them, yeah, for cost.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, mine shows 1:30.
Yeah.
10:30. All right.
Time
Like
zone.
10:30 Pacific.